Hello and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn and this is In the Roud, a folk song podcast. I'll be your host to guide you through the world of traditional folk song as we go through the Roud Index, one song at a time. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. Way back at the very beginning of this podcast, I recorded an interview with Steve Roud where he explained a little bit about the index, so please head back to that introduction episode if you're unsure what the Roud Index is. We're back to our regularly scheduled programme after a break last week when we featured the first Patreon episode. So here we are with Season 2, Episode 3. This week's song is Roud 13, The Dowie Dens of Yarrow. Later on, we'll hear from singer Amanda MacLean, but for now, let's have a look at the history of the Dowie Dens of Yarrow from singer and researcher Laurie Watson. Well, hello, and a first-time welcome to In the Roud, Laurie Watson. Hello.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being had on this. This is a great pleasure to have you, because we've never actually met before, but we were both at Newcastle University at the same time, it turns out. More or less.
Yeah, I think I was up and down the road, and of course we've got lots of pals and musicians in common, so yeah, nice to finally meet you.
Yeah, you too, because I think I think we've been friends on Facebook for a while, somehow, I think so. But, nice to put a face and a voice to the name. How are you? You're obviously very busy at the moment. I'm very appreciative of you slotting me in some time here, but you're quite busy at the moment, aren't you, with stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very happy to support your project. I think what you're doing is brilliant. So it's going to be an amazing resource, and the legacy aspect is just so important. So very, very happy to make time for it. But yeah, I'm in the middle of a project where I'm actually spending all my time thinking about contemporary practice of folk musicians and composition. And so this was kind of like returning to some of the ballad information, which certainly as a musician, ballads have become very important to me, and particularly some of my local ballads, and Dowie Dens of Yarrow is one of those. So yeah, it's nice to come back to that.
Well, you mentioned it, so let's go straight in.
Oh. Did I blow the cover there?
No, not at all. It's all good. It's all fine. It's been it would have been announced already. Yeah, so Dowie Dens of Yarrow. This is Roud 13, and of course we're another child ballad as well. Child ballad 214. We're gradually ticking them all off as we go through the main podcast. I was just looking at my spreadsheet. We didn't mention this in season 1, but season 1 of the 10 songs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 of them were child ballads.
Mm-hmm.
And in this season, out of the 10 songs, 5 of them are child ballads. So, we're getting a good healthy child ballad quota so far. But then looking through the next 100 songs, as I have done, like 90% of them are child ballads. So obviously Steve decided to get them done, which is fine, except that it didn't include any Irish songs, which is not much in the way of balance on this podcast. Sorry, Ireland. You have to just bear with for a while. So Child 214, Roud 13, Dowie Dens of Yarrow. First of all, give us a sort of a kind of plot and what's the song about? What are we dealing with in terms of subject matter and plot of the song?
Sure. There's quite a lot of variation as we find in oral tradition. It's often called the Braes of Yarrow.
That's what it's called in Child, isn't it? I think. Yeah,
he kind of groups the family of variants together under that title as well, which is a little confusing because there are another two composed songs of that title also in circulation. One was a William Hamilton composition, I think. It's in Ritson and it's in the Greg Duncan. Starts Busky Busky. So it's not that one. It's the,
Okay.
the traditional ballad, Braes of Yarrow, also, I think probably more often referred to as the Dowie Dens of Yarrow now in Scotland.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in terms of the narrative, there's a central courtship between a woman and a man. Sometimes the man is a husband or a knight. Sometimes a lower class ploughman or other kind of labourer, and usually there are 9 noblemen that conspire against her, what is often referred to as her love or her true love. So this knight or husband or ploughman, for example. Sometimes it's 9, sometimes it's 7, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's a duel between 2. But in terms of the versions that I have encountered being sung, 9 seems to be more frequent to my mind. And of course, a battle ensues, and her true love fights each of these men, the 7 brothers sometimes, or noblemen, and he fights them one at a time, or sometimes they're grouped in 3s. I like the version where it's he kills 3 and he wounds 3 and 3 run away.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, I like that. And after all of that fighting, then there's a couple of versions, I think, where someone else kills the true love or the hero of the narrative, but often it's her brother. So her brother stabs him in the back. So he fights off these 9 noblemen and her brother stabs him in the back. Or sometimes it's 7 brothers. And he kills 6 and spares the last, and that brother then kills him, stabs him in the back. So yeah, there are many variations around these aspects of the story. After that, someone is sent to take the message to the lady in the story, and in many variants her name is Sarah. And sometimes it's the brother that takes the message. There's a variant or 2, I think, where the mother takes the message. And in many of the variants, there's a premonition. So the woman has had a dream. So that we kind of travel back in time a little after the death of the hero. We travel back, and the woman has had a dream. She's had a premonition that either, her brother was spilling blood, was killing people, or sometimes it's that she was pulling green heather with her love in Yarrow. And of course, green has all kinds of connotations and folkloric meaning. Sometimes, to do with youthfulness or naivety, and also is a bad omen. So she has this dream, this premonition, and there's a version where her brother who's taking the message that her true love is dead back to her, he says that he'll read her dream into sorrow, and tells her that her true love is dead. And sometimes it's delivered quite bluntly. He's dead and gone and a bloody corpse in Yarrow. And other times it's more gently delivered. Yeah. And so following that, there's a lovely scene in many of the variants, which is quite a tender scene. Sometimes it appears earlier in the song, particularly when it's a husband and it's the character's name is Sarah. But where she's kind of tending to her true love, she's preparing him. She warns him not to go in many of the versions, not to go and face her brothers or the noblemen, or warns him not to go out because they're going to be waiting for him. And she's kind of dressing him or combing his hair, and there's a real tenderness between them. And I think that this kind of the idea of true love isn't just stated, but it's brought out in the imagery and the actions and the narrative, which is lovely. And so this point when she goes to his body and tends to him, Sometimes she wraps her hair around his middle. So there's this kind of in the narrative here that he's gone. She's tending to a dead body, but there's still a fragility he's described in very kind of caring way. So she tends to his hair and his wounds, and at this point in some variants it can come across as a bit gory, but she kind of kisses his wounds till her lips are red, or there's in some variants she drinks the blood. But there's this is it's not just it's not a casual courtship. It's very, very deep affection that is conveyed in the narrative.
Either that or she's a vampire. Yeah.
Well, we are coming up to that time of the year, aren't we? So
we are. Yes.
Yeah, and she, in some variants, she carries him home, and I think there's a few where the body is tied and someone is dragged along by a horse, but mostly I think the versions that are chosen by singers tend to be leaning into the kind of the tender treatment of the true love by the woman, and she carries him, she gets him back to Yarrow.
It's the more romantic stuff, isn't it, rather than the gruesome stuff.
Well, I think that's the way we all hope that would be treated at the end, isn't it?
Yes, not true love. We loved you so long. If I die, will you drink my blood? It'd be a real intense relationship with that, I think.
I mean, that's a whole other podcast, absolutely.
Indeed, I'm sure there are websites for that sort of thing. I'm sure. not that I know.
So yeah, and then at the end of the story, we get the father who just is absolutely lacking in compassion. Her father says, enough of this sorrow, or whatever you're doing is just making yourself more upset. Stop. You no need to cry. I'll find you a better man. And of course, this is the poignant moment of the story where she's like, there is no better man. And she speaks. She kind of like stands up to her father, which is important. I think it's significant for a woman of any era to stand up to their father. She tells him to hold his tongue, and sometimes she says, you've got all these sons, you can marry them tomorrow, I don't care. The best man, the fairest flower or the fairest rose was my true love, who is not here now. And there's a local version in Yarrow, which she also said, she really, the female character, the Sarah, it tells her father that she kind of pinpoints the financial resources, which are really the problem here. That's what caused the whole ordeal. And she says, call your Ausen and your Kai home, and just is basically writing off, like, if they had all gone mad, or if the cattle weren't part of the picture, this would not have happened. My true love would still be here. Right, so, sure. And I think not all the variants kind of hit that on the nose. Yeah. Right.
Sure. Yeah. So, where in Scotland is Yarrow?
Yarrow is it's a small valley, and the water extends from the west through the Yarrow Valley, St Mary's Loch, out towards Selkirk. So from west into the centre of the borders. And there we go.
I've got it on Google Maps. There we go. Yeah.
There are two parallel valleys, and I think that's really important. The Yarrow Valley and the Ettrick Valley were actually the same community in many ways, and the people who lived and worked there, and potentially the people involved in a version of this story, were spread across both of those valleys.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, looking at a map, it's kind of immediately south of, or not immediately, but directly south of Edinburgh, and down into the countryside, which is very good. So Dowie Dens Yarrow, then, it's we know sort of, is this a particularly sort of widespread and popular song?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, particularly, you know, there are many variations sung across Scotland. It's well known throughout the UK and Ireland. There are a couple of Scandinavian songs which are very, very similar, and it's popularly sung in North America. It as a ballad which is often referred to as a border ballad, or a ballad of the Middle Marches, which is a very specific. It's kind of the central area of the borders. But it has been very, very popular in the northeast of Scotland, which is quite a different community. But we don't see them localising it. It hasn't become about another area, and it could be that the rhyme scheme is just so much part of the identity of this of this particular song that they didn't change the place names.
It's always Yarrow. Yeah, it's well, it rhymes with marrow, I suppose, doesn't it? So
it does, and it's like there. I think Child references it as well. You know that there are some versions where the kind of additions that have been made are a bit nonsensical, or they get a bit silly, I think was his reference. And certainly when I was learning and gigging, touring with the song, it did become a joke backstage. We had verses that, she pushed the wheelbarrow in order to rhyme with Yara. It's like you run out of rhymes eventually, so it's limiting in some ways and iconic in other ways. Yeah.
That's right. I was just looking at some versions listed on Made in Norfolk, and you got marrow, obviously, because that's in the first verse. Narrow, sorrow, yellow, and tomorrow as well.
Yeah.
I mean, some of those are quite acceptable.
Yeah.
Not sure about yellow though. I'm not sure.
Well, that was commonly a description for hair colour, wasn't it? So blonde.
It was, yeah, that's right. Her hair, it being 3/4 long, the colour it was yellow. That's right. So yeah, it's all yellow.
Sometimes it's the male character's hair that's that long as well. I think the more one of the rarer variants where he's pulled home by the horse. I think they actually attach him using his hair, which was 4/4 or even 5/4 long. But yeah, I think
that's fantastic. That's the weirdness of folk songs for you. 5/4. Yeah. And actually, while we're on the subject of that word, just give us what does marrow mean? Obviously, we're not talking about the vegetable. So what are we talking about? What are we talking about in terms of marrow?
Yeah, I mean that it is almost universally agreed that reference to marrow is the husband or the mate.
Okay.
So a wife, a husband, or a mate. And I think if you look at different eras of use of that word, particularly in Scotland and the Scottish marriages, it was quite transactional. It was almost a business arrangement in many cases, until this kind of societal infrastructure shifted and it could become more about love. But I think the word marrow, it was also used by the church to mean, your core, and so that's not really discussed, but that's something that I used in the interpretation of my own verses for singing the ballad. I also leaned into the idea that the word marrow would have been in general circulation in the area through the church.
Right. Because coming up, as I'm going to come to quite a lot of Scots songs over the course of this podcast, it's going to come up with some language that we're just not particularly familiar with outside of Scotland. And I've been using the Dictionary of Scots Language website as well, just the occasional, just as a frame of reference.
It's an amazing resource. Yeah.
Marrow, a match or equal, one of like ability, content, appearance, social standing, etc. So, and there you go. Yeah, exactly. Which very makes sense. There was a lady in the north. You'd scarcely find her marrow, her equal, her her match. So that's
yeah. But I think in Northumberland and Newcastle, Mara is a friend. That's still in common usage today.
Oh, I suppose it is actually. Yeah. I mean, I haven't lived in Newcastle for 12 years, but so whatever I did pick up has gone. Considered, I've still got a hard A occasionally. I still say bath instead of bath. But apart from that, my anything I picked up from not living in Sussex has gone.
Oh,
Never mind, never mind. Um, so, and I said it's international. So it was quite, well, not quite international, but there's a few international mentions of this song. You mentioned
yeah, no,
Scandinavia and
it travelled. I mean, I think that it's unclear, and of course, we'd all love to know. We'd love to know, where did this ballad first emerge, and then how did it change in each kind of era of its existence? But yeah, as far as I know, we don't have that information for this song. There are two songs in Scandinavia. I think in maybe one was collected in Sweden, but the language is Danish, of course, because of the way that Sweden and Norway and Denmark were grouped. And yeah, there's one. In fact, both of the songs, the Scandinavian songs that I know of, were about brothers, and the number was 7. So 7 brothers. I think there's Helmer and there's Jomfruen i Skoven. And yeah, so those are 2 where it's very much the brothers. There are 7 of them, and in one of them, the last brother, who is spared by the hero, then kills him. So he's betrayed by this person whose life he has spared. And in the other, again, the lady warns him not to face her brothers, but he tries to be noble and reason with them, and tries to convince them to let him marry her. And yeah, he fights the brothers, kills them all, and somehow he is also killed as well. So everybody dies in the Jomfruen i Skoven. Yeah.
sorry, I shouldn't laugh at everybody dies, but it just, you become slightly immune to that sort of gruesomeness when you delve into folk
thing,
songs.
isn't it? It's
just,
it's like,
everyone
great,
dies.
Somebody
Great.
survived this one as a treat.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
a happy ending if one survives out of everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know it did turn up in America as well, didn't it? Because I was looking through Bronson, the tunes for the child ballads, and there's at least 1 or 2 mentions of some American versions.
That's
well.
right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not very familiar with the American versions, but I find it fascinating to look at the variations that you see in terms of lyric and story, and the what was important to the people who had immigrated or were living there. The parts of their ways of life that come into the ballads. I think we were talking earlier, and you mentioned the cowboy is mentioned in one of the variants.
Yeah, that's right. It's if anyone's got a Bronson, it's number 30 in the Brace of Yarrow section. Interestingly, it's out of 42. Bronson managed to collect 42 tunes for this song, which is a good, healthy number, I think. But he found, sung by Mrs. Lola Stanley of Fayetteville, Arkansas in 1959. And that had, because normally the song is something along the lines of, there was a lady in the north, you'd scarcely find her marrow. She was courted by 9 noblemen or 9 gentlemen on the Dowie dens of Yarrow. And this American one, you've got, I knew a lady of the north, a fair, oh was she. She was courted by 9 noble cowboys on the Derry downs of Arrow.
Yeah.
Isn't that fantastic? Her father hired a noble cowboy. She loved him, she did dearly. She dressed him up as a nobleman and sent him away to Arrow. I'm not going to read out the whole thing. It's 13 verses, but you get the idea. And Sarah in that one is sorrow, which is quite common, I think, in old American songs. It's pretty sorrow and all that sort of thing. And her brother Jim, that's quite American, I think.
Yeah.
You don't get Jim much over here. You might get James, but you don't get the shortening of Jim in trad songs very much. And her sweetheart John. Oh, daughter, dear, I will read your dream. All the dream stuff's there. Lots of mentions of the high hills and valleys in that one. And it ends with, laid him in his grave on the Derry downs of Arrow. Oh, and then you get, Father dear, 7 sons you have, you can wed them all tomorrow. but the very old bloom that sprung in June is the one I lost on Arrow. This is quite good. I might learn this. This is really good. And it ends with, "O daughter dear, dry up your tears and weep
Yeah.
no more for sorrow. I'll lead you to a better lad than the one you lost on Arrow." So it ends with the father saying, "Don't worry, I'll sort you out. I'll find you someone else." Might get rid of that verse.
So am I right in thinking the lady doesn't speak back in that version?
Well, I think maybe the verse the wrong way around, because verse 13 that it ends is the daughter, daughter, I'll lead you to a better lad. But the previous one is her saying, "Oh, father dear, 7 sons you have, you can wed them all tomorrow." So I wonder whether they've just been swapped. Ordinarily, those would be the other way around, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I find that really interesting because sometimes what we see in ballads that have travelled to North America is that over in the Scottish version, thinking of a couple of songs in particular, the Scottish versions really promote the family unit and the place of the women within it, whereas the versions that travelled or emerged in North America more promote kind of like rebellious ideals. So women leaving their family and running off with someone or setting out on their own. And of course, there's a discussion and an argument around the way that behaviour was required in order to immigrate, to change your life, to up and leave your entire world and go somewhere new. And so it was coming out in the songs, or in fact, the songs were helping people to make that transition. But what you've described there is kind of the other way around, where the father-daughter relationship is more amicable than many of the versions we have over here.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know where, what the lineage of that particular, the Derry Downs of Arrow is. I'm not sure we'll ever know. Who knows? But it's quite interesting.
That sounds like somebody misheard it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I might have to talk to someone like Sarah Gray or someone very quite knowledgeable on the American ballads and see what the lineage of the song is over there. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff, all the different variations. We've skipped slightly ahead, but do we know what's the kind of earliest known sort of version? How far can we trace this back in terms of?
I mean,
because there are some songs that you can't trace back any further than like 1850s, and we've covered some on the podcast that are. There's two that we can definitely look at something that turned up in 1604 and say that's the same song. So where does Dowie Dens of Yarrow sit in that kind of thing?
Well, I think that you've just reminded me that there is one earlier, and I think there's a poem which is perhaps based on it, which came beforehand, was printed beforehand, and I can't quite recall the details of that. But the first published version was Walter Scott's Composite, which was in his Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border, and that first came out in 1802. But I think the date that's is connected with the publication of Dowie Dens of Yarrow is 1803. I mean, of course, we always have this thing with ballads is when they're printed or published, but also when the events or characters might have existed. And we've got historical events from the 1200s that align with some of our Scottish ballads. But in this case, we're probably, if it is indeed a telling of a story which took place in the Borders, then we're looking at the 1600s.
Right. Yeah, 1803. So that's good. That's good innings for how far we can go back.
It's not bad, yeah.
Not bad at all.
And it was at that point, the way it's described by James Hogg and Walter Scott is that there were a proliferation of versions of this already. It was a very important, meaningful song locally. So it was very much in circulation. It wasn't new when it was published.
Right. Yeah, I'm just looking at the sleeve notes for a reissue of a Ewan MacColl album that he sang it on. And the booklet is written by a guy called Kenneth S. Goldstein. Mm-hmm. And he says, Child printed 19 texts of this tragic ballad, the oldest dating from the 18th century. So Walter Scott, you just mentioned Walter Scott, published it in Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border. 1803, he believed the ballad referred to a duel fought at the beginning of the 17th century between John Scott and Walter Scott, in which the latter was slain. Child pointed out inaccuracies in this theory, but tended to give credence to the possibility that the ballad did refer to an actual occurrence in Scott family history that was not too far removed from that of the ballad tale.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tricky. Walter Scott, he was keen to have a personal connection to what was going. That was very meaningful to him. But he was careful in the language that he used to not say anything that sounded too definite. But there's two historical events which have been recorded. And of course, there's lots of John Scotts, there's lots of Walter Scotts.
Of course, yeah.
Hundreds of years worth of those names. But there was there was two branches of the Scott family. Which one was Thurlston and the other was Tushielaw. Very close together.
Oh, okay. I did actually. Right, so I missed out those two words when I read out that bit of thing. It did say the duel between John Scott of Tushielaw and Walter Scott of Thurlston. So it was the warring Scots,
There was a duel, but and I think that refers to the Selkirk Presbytery records of 1609. So I think that was the one that Walter Scott was interested in initially, but the marriage didn't line up. However, a later event, so I think 1616, and I think this is what Child was pointing out, and I think there was a correction made in a later edition of the minstrelsy of Walter Scott's minstrelsy along these lines. But there was a situation in 1616, because so after the 1609 duel, there was very much a feud between these two branches of the same family. Family feuds are not uncommon in the Borders. We have a very long, violent history of that way of life. I mean, the whole infrastructure and this kind of area of the marches, that very much was part of the way things ran in the Borders was different from the rest of the country, and both sides of the border, the south of Scotland and the north of England. But this feud between the two branches of the same family continued, and then in 1616 there was, I think there was some kind of legal proceedings in Melrose, and a group of one branch of the Scott family had to go and account for the murder, a very brutal murder of a Walter Scott from the other side. So I think it sounds like the 1616 event much more closely aligns with the ballad, because the marriage aligns with the story, whereas the earlier one it didn't quite match up.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
And I think someone else had a theory about it being related to the next child ballad, the 215, the Rare Willie Drowned in Yarrow. I've not looked at that one closely. I don't really know, but
yeah. I mean, there's versions of that. There are versions, really lovely songs, where the singer has borrowed from both stories, and they're a little bit muddled up. Of course. So and they sit side by side in Child. So it's 214 and 215. So there are some variants where, but to me it seems that folk have just brought these elements together in the telling of a good story and song. It doesn't seem to me that they came from the same root.
I mean, that's the thing. Never let anything get in the way of a good story. Truth, taste, anything. Just just all for the story. It's fine. Yeah,
I mean, I think we all live in hope that more information will come to light about these things, and we can know things more certainly. But yeah,
absolutely. How is that like radically different from like what we know the song as now, or has it kind of stayed the same over the intervening years?
No, I mean, I think I don't think it's radically different. It is a composite, which is important. So Walter Scott drew on at least 3 local versions, although in some descriptions it sounds more numerous than that. And he describes it. Actually, it was very difficult to choose what to put into his composite.
Of course. So yeah, we know that it does go back further than 1803. It's just that's what we've got as the publication.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not one of those songs where, you've got one or two versions of the story that have become very prominent and the others have kind of fallen back. These different kind of versions of the story where, it's noblemen or it's brothers or it's a ploughman or it's a labourer or it's a knight and a husband, they very much sit side by side. I think Ewan MacColl very much popularised his song version, and Joni Mitchell ended up releasing a cover, which is really lovely.
Oh yeah, the Ewan MacColl, Nine Gentlemen in that one.
Yeah, but
and Seven Sons as well.
Yeah, but the actual, I think the story, the ballad, is recognisable in all the forms.
So it's more that the plot's kind of relatively the same, but it's the details that change and vary.
Yeah, and then there are surprises there, like the idea that in the northeast significant local changes weren't made. It's a borders song sung in the northeast of Scotland.
Right.
Aberdeenshire. I was just going to say, in terms of the recordings, the kind of archive recordings that are available to us, we have a brilliant collection of sung performances by singers in the northeast, particularly Scottish travellers.
Right.
And I think in terms of singers from the borders, we have less on record, but they're still singing with the border place names, and so those aspects didn't change, even though it was in a different geographical place. Yeah. And
so this definitely feels like it's definitely a complete song, isn't it? You get some songs that, it's a ballad, but it's only, I'm going to quickly count a version, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It tends to be sort of around the 10 to 14 verse mark, which is not that long for some ballads, I think.
Yeah, that's totally workable for a modern audience.
Yeah, exactly. But but it definitely feels like a complete song, a complete story. It's not. There are some songs that are short enough that you think, well, this is clearly a fragment of something that came before, and then even, where are we? This is episode 3 of In the Roud. So actually, next week we'll be coming to a song that, due to the wonders of podcast recording, I've recorded all of next week's episode already, and with Brian Peters doing the history for it. And brilliant. Although he'll say this in depth, but The Demon Lover, it's a complete song, but actually it's the second half of a very early broadside. There's 21 verses that happen before anything in that first version that turns up that has anything to do with what we know as The Demon Lover. But here, it doesn't feel like there's anything else in this song. It definitely feels like a complete thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I haven't looked at all of the possible contributions to Walter Scott's composite, but one of them is from the Hogg family ballad. So, Margaret Laidlaw was a key informant or contributor to Walter Scott's collection via James Hogg and William Laidlaw, who were contributing versions from local singers and relaying those to Walter Scott, and there are some differences there, but it's very much the same kind of, broadly speaking, the same story. It's identifiable straight away, and I think there are a few it has been combined with other things, and I think we have sorry, I've run out of water here. This nursery bugs everywhere.
It's all right.
When we look at the version sung in the northeast of Scotland, particularly the Greg Duncan collection, in there I think we've got 5 transcriptions of lyrics and melody, and then there's a further 20 melodies transcribed, many of which are similar. You can see the small variation in the tunes that were sung up there. but there are some versions which have become more fragmented. But certainly in terms of the early versions that we have of the Dowie Dens of Yarrow in Scotland, that it feels like a complete story, yeah, and it feels very, very close to these local events.
Sure, yeah.
So I think it's also important to note that the song and the story have been very meaningful locally in the Yarrow and Ettrick valleys, both in James Hogg's view, when contributing to the minstrelsy, and still today. I think Hogg had written in the copy he handed to Walter Scott that tradition placeth the event on which this song is founded very early. And so there was this local, and of course that was what audiences were interested in, and that's what publishers wanted. And so there was people leaned towards making things seem as old and rare as possible. But I think there was a general agreement that this was an older story than kind of late 1700s, early 1800s. And there seemed to be agreement locally that it had been written close to the time of these specific events, of course. They thought that the hero lived locally in Ettrick, and that he had been killed by his brother-in-law because his father had given half of their resources, or half of their, I think, gear and goods is how they refer to it, with his sister's marriage, and so this caused a major problem. Hogg also indicates in his notes that that local people knew the story well, and I think the phrase he used was that which the least child that can walk the road will tell you the two lords are buried that were slain in the duel. And he's referring to these local landmarks, these standing stones, which I think Walter Scott had written that it's universally believed that this ballad is founded in fact. I think, Child had a more neutral and balanced view, of course. Looking at the different variants of the ballad and the spread, where they were collected, where they were sung and written, or printed and published. And but I think it's notable that the strength of the ballad and the story in local folklore, over several centuries is impressive. It's very it has remained that way. And if you go to the borders now, people will tell you about the standing stones. If you drop into one of the local pubs near Yarrow or Selkirk, and ask about it, someone will say, "Oh, head up, along the north side of the loch, and you'll see Yarrow Kirkyard, and there's two standing stones. There's the glebe stone, and they'll be able to point things out, and they'll tell you it as if it's factual." And so, there's still very much an awareness of this story and this song in the local area, which is meaningful in itself and quite a special thing.
Yeah, that's great that sort of thing happens still. There was a traditional singer, I can't remember his name. Someone will kick me for forgetting his name, but there's lots of recordings of him, and pretty much every single song that he sang to the collector started with him saying, "This was a true story." And in the end, we stopped believing him, And even one song he said, "This happened to my grandfather." And I think, you're just trying to impress the collector.
Yeah, but I think the thing is that not all events and stories last. It is a selective process, and it tells us about, the kind of people that we are, or the kind of people that there are in these places. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, another point to note is that with the Hogg family version, the title that this ballad is given is the Dowie Homes of Yarrow, and
okay.
Which you don't see in many versions at all. But that phrase has been retained by Walter Scott in the lyrics of the version that he published. So it is referred to as the Dowie Homes in one of the stanzas, but not in the title. So nice to see that a remnant of that in that published version. And the song was also published as a broadside, but in the late 1800s, as far as I know. So of course that catapulted it into wider circulation. But yeah, I mean, like moving into the 20th century in Yarrow, in the same area, we've got Willie Scott, who was a shepherd and singer, and his family were from Liddesdale, which is very close. And he sang Dowie Dens quite often. And I interviewed a local historian who lives in Selkirk, called Walter Elliott, and his family are from Ettrick. The Elliots have been in Ettrick for hundreds of years. And he had said that he remembered, and as a younger person, he remembered Willie Scott singing Dowie Dens in the village halls all around the valley. So the song was regularly shared and performed there.
Amazing.
And of course, Willie Scott was recorded by Francis Collinson and by Hamish Henderson, and then by Alison McMorland. And Alison McMorland produced a really great book called Herd Laddie o' the Glen, and it has great transcriptions of Willie Scott's singing and lyrics for a range of songs, and his reminiscences about his work and his family, and the singing of the songs, the kind of events, which of course revolved around the seasons and the kind of agricultural way of life. I think there is a slight difference in two of the accounts of this song for Willie Scott, which were interesting to me. In the 1954 recording with Hamish Henderson, Willie Scott says that he learned and first heard the song sung by his father.
Great.
But in his work with Alison, he associates the song with his mother, and it's also documented that she and her kind of, acquaintances who also sang. I think Willie had heard them first singing after the sheep clipping, which is kind of a big event. It becomes a social event. But he said that her repertoire was very influenced by the kind of longer, sad songs. She loved singing the sad songs, and so you can understand why this would have been in her repertoire. So yeah, it's interesting that those two slightly different accounts, but one of the interesting things about Willie Scott's singing is that the melody is not it's not the common melody. It's not a variation of the common melody that we have for this ballad. And Willie Scott sings it with quite a prominent metre, which in some of the released versions, the album versions that are out there, it's really it sounds a little bit upbeat for a tragic ballad. And certainly when you think about ballad metre and the effect that can have on performance, I actually wonder if Willie Scott was singing this tragic ballad while he was walking about or while he was working, or he's pulled the tempo and the kind of the pacing, the pulse have been lifted a bit in some of those versions. But the 1954 recording at School of Scottish Studies is far more, there's a freedom to it in the ballad metre. The kind of da, dee, da, dee, da comes through clearer.
Right, sure,
yeah. But the song, the melody that he sang, which I have changed a wee bit, of course, because that's what happened to it. It's got that lovely juxtaposition between kind of like quite a major, kind of happy melody if you isolate the tune, and then this very tragic story, and we love that, don't we? We love that. We see it. You don't get a film these days made without one of those scenes that something awful happening to like quite uplifting music. But yeah, it starts with this kind of nice scale up, da dee da dee da. Which is really quite a rare melody when you look at all the versions collected.
Yeah, I think most of the ones, I didn't have a chance to look at all of them, but I think most of the tunes that are in Bronson for this one, it's all that minor key tune.
Yeah. Da-da-dee, da-dum, da-da-dee, dum, da-da-dee, dum, da-da. Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
I think that interval, that bit at the end of that second line, always seems to be quite weighted, and that's the melody that we have mostly in the northeast, so Aberdeenshire, northeast of Scotland. we hear the variations on that tune overwhelmingly that's the melody that's sung up there, or has been collected up there. But that, although there's quite a lot of variations in the way the melody is wound around the lyrics, that that cadence is fairly consistent. There are some exceptions, but it's you find the singers are leaning into that quite a lot. In fact, I sing a little differently. But still, that particular cadence at the end of line 2 is still there.
There's the version I don't sing it, but the version I know from the scene of Shepherd, Spears, and Watson, Tom Spears singing it. It's a major key one. It's neither of those two, but it's still got that end of second line slight jump in it. The it's still got that jump on the word marrow.
Yes, there's a real feature in the melody, and in some of the verses, it is something meaningful, and in other verses, it's less meaningful. It's like you might pass over the lyrics sometimes, but it's always a really prominent moment in the melody. So, and that's one of the things that catches us and draws us in, isn't it?
Absolutely, I'm very focused on when I'm song searching. I respond to songs far quicker and easily if if I'm listening to someone singing it, like a source recording. I get very, very bored very quickly if I'm looking through a book of songs, because I can't. I mean, it might have the melody written out as well, but nevertheless, my attention wanders far quicker if it's not an audio recording.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, our kind of like emotional investment in music is far quicker in many cases than it is in text.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of an emotional connection about I'm instantly able to sort of hear why that person wanted to sing it, because I can hear the melody of the words and the way they're singing it, and what it sort of musically means to them in a way.
Yeah.
And I respond much better to that than to printed text, despite the fact that I keep buying lots of books with lots of songs in it.
Well, we all know it's a process, especially these bigger songs with these big universal themes. There are layers and layers, and your own life experiences kind of enrich how you feel about it and change how you sing it.
Yeah.
It's a long process, isn't it? Yeah. So, I mean, just talking about that the most common tune group in Bronson, the group A, that we hear many or most of the singers in the northeast of Scotland, Aberdeenshire, singing, the Jimmy McBeath example is a good example of that. And it was recorded a little earlier in his life, or it's certainly the archive recording, which we'll link on the podcast page, is when his voice is very rich and you've still got that lovely texture, but not in his final years when his voice became its most characterful. And this kind of slightly earlier, rich vocal suits this song so well. And it's thinking about the different performances, traditional performances, and the melodies and variations. Also, so we've got Willie Scott, Jimmy McBeath, Belle Stewart uses slightly different. Well, she uses different pitches at the end of that second line, but they're still very prominent, as in the version that you sang as well there, Matt.
Yeah.
But certainly carry weight. So Belle Stewart, of course, was a traveller based in the northeast of Scotland.
One of the many Stewarts in the same family, I think, weren't they? They were all all the Stewarts kind of the same? Because I know I'm going to mention Sheila Stewart later on, and she's one of the most prominent Stewarts.
I think no. I mean, there were different branches, so you probably could trace the connections if you went back far enough. But it wasn't all one kind of family unit. But certainly very much part of the same community.
Sure.
So the the 1953 recording of Belle Stewart, she sings about 7 brothers rather than the noblemen or the 9. And I think that in this performance, there's more of a focus on the women, focus on the lady's premonition and the mother's interpretation of it. So there's some variation there, which is valuable, I think, in terms of traditional song performance. But Belle Stewart was the mother of Sheila Stewart, and Sheila was also recorded singing this song, and just very, very fine voices.
That's right. I had listened to that one the other day, and I mean, Sheila Stewart was an extraordinary singer anyway. But every time I hear a recording of her, I'm sort of going, "Blimey, she was incredible." But yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the other recording I wanted to highlight is a Maggie Stewart. We've got lots of recordings of Maggie Stewart. Again, a traveller, recorded in 1954. And it's a very nice version. What we see is, interestingly, that there is, or perhaps unusually, because I think I said earlier, although this ballad has travelled, partly because of the rhyme scheme, it hasn't been kind of relocated to other places.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
In folk all over the world singing about this small valley in the Borders, which is just amazing.
Apart from that one American version where they changed it to Arrow. Yeah. Apart from that one. Maybe it's apostrophe Arrow rather than Arrow. Maybe they just, they couldn't be bothered to sing the letter Y.
I mean, I think it's a challenge. I think they did very well in removing the Borders locality. But one of the things we see in the Maggie Stewart performed version is that the story is heard from a farmer from the Isle of Skye. So okay. It's like so they're talking about the events in Yarrow, but they heard it from, and that became important enough that it was like the first line of the song is, I heard this from a farmer from the Isle of Skye, and then they proceed to sing a version, with I think 9 noble gentlemen, like extra emphasis on the nobility of these adversaries to the love interest or the hero.
Well, in that Arrow version, the American version, it's that they are 9 noble cowboys. So they kept the nobility even though it's cowboys. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. So Willie Scott, Jimmy McBeath, Belle Stewart, Maggie Stewart. That's great.
And I think you had mentioned Jane Turriff, who she's one of my favourite all-time traditional singers.
She's wonderful, isn't she? Yeah. It seems to me quite rare that we find someone that we would sort of label as a traditional singer, but they're accompanying themselves with an instrument. That's quite uncommon. There was a guy in Sussex who did that, and I can't remember his name either. So I didn't prep for this anecdote, but there's a guy who did that as well. Jack somebody. I don't know.
You can add it to the notes on the page.
Yeah, he basically accompanied himself melodian, and there was I'm pretty sure there's another guy in like Suffolk or Norfolk who did the same. And it's just it's not the most common to accompany for traditional singers to accompany themselves, but Jane Turriff did that.
Yeah, and I think she had a very rich inner world, in terms of her imagination and how she found the songs transported her. Right. And so I don't think it was just that she played an instrument, but the instrument certainly gave her this foundation to shift into, I don't know, almost another world when she's singing. And there's a lovely fieldwork video of her playing and talking about the way that she sings and plays, and how it takes her away. She's kind of
lovely.
She is washed away in a tidal wave of just emotional connection with the songs. It's quite stunning, isn't it, to hear, and quite innovative.
Yeah, absolutely.
But certainly full of rich traditional style. And
I think Jane had didn't check on this quite closely enough, but I think Jane had a opening verse that doesn't appear much in other versions. I don't think. I'm going by some sleeve notes here from a 1996 album that came out on Springtime Records.
Hmm.
Singing Is My Life, that album of Jane's
That's
stuff.
right. Yeah.
And sleeve notes said Greg the Greg Duncan collection had 11 texts for this song. None
Hmm.
have Jane Turiff's distinctive opening verse. And it says there is much similarity, however, when it comes to the combat verses. It is not clear in
Hmm.
Jane's version who the murderer is. Apparently. Uh,
Yeah. And will you just put the audio in there?
yes, I'll probably play a clip of that in the
Yeah.
in the mid break. It also says about
Great.
that version. On one occasion, Jane sang the song to a different melody, and she sometimes begins with two extra verses, which do help to clarify the motive. So,
Hmm.
but I don't know if we got recording of that or not. It says these lines also appear in verses 2 and 3 of another version noted by William Motherwell in 1825. So, yeah, it's all a bit free and easy
Hmm.
and what's the word? Jumbled. But
Hmm.
the Jane Turiff is recording is wonderful. I want to highlight also Stanley Robertson because he was fabulous. One of those really almost like sort of the most measured. So don't want to say slow, the most sort of measured singer I've ever heard. Just completely like I'm going to take my time over this, and no one's going to stop me.
Just gives it so much gravitas, doesn't
Mm.
it? That approach.
There's a recording of him singing it on an album of his songs called "The College Boy,"
Hmm.
which was released in 2009 in on the from the Elphinstone Institute. Jane Turf was a cousin of Stanley Robertson, apparently.
Yeah.
So there we go. Um, but yeah, Stanley Robertson's one was great. I can't remember the tune for that one off the top of my head, but it was really brilliant. And a slightly easier one to track down is a recording of John MacDonald singing
Hmm.
it because that's on volume 3 of the Topic release, The Voice of the People.
John MacDonald, the singing mole catcher.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
The singing mole catcher of Morayshire.
Yeah. Had an amazing repertoire. Yeah.
And so that's the name of that, the 1975 Topic album, The Singing Mole Catcher of Morayshire.
Yeah.
And then that track is on The Voice of the People, Volume 3. I think that volume's called Ballads, but it's also called O'er His Grave, The Grass Grew Green. John said he got his version 60 years previously from a ploughman in Kerrow called Bob Kemp.
Mm.
So that's a very good version. And and Sheila Stewart was my other one to mention. So we've already
Yeah.
mentioned Sheila Stewart. I think she was recorded singing that. It was Hamish Henderson again. I think
Yeah.
recorded her singing that one. But yeah, they're all. It's all fascinating and odd. Fascinating and odd. That's folk music. Fascinating but odd.
It is, and I should say that just since we've referred to so many traveller singers, that there's some ongoing research and activism happening in Scotland in support of the traveller community, and many of them have a preference for the name Knockin rather than traveller.
Ah,
So there's a good bit of education happening up here just now.
oh great.
Yeah, around that. It's good. It's positive.
So yeah, that's Willie Scott, Jimmy McBeath, Belle Stewart, Maggie Stewart, Sheila Stewart, Jane Turf, Stanley Robertson, and John MacDonald. And yeah, I'll play clips from some of those in the mid-episode break in a couple of minutes. But I'll also stick a load of links in the show notes to the pages where you can hear the recordings in full on the School of Scottish Studies. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. The Sound Archive at the School Scottish Studies Archives.
Ah, great. Yeah, yeah. We need, and I will put a link to that whole site in general. There's a little section in the episode notes of links to song archives and song collections and things. So I'll put a link there as well.
Great.
But yeah, I think we better call it to a halt there. We've been talking for quite a while, which is good. You know, there's no strict time format for this sort of thing. And someone once told me about making albums. You never finish making an album. You just have to call it to a halt and get on with your life.
You just have to start recovering the costs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think we'll leave it there.
Yeah, I'd also like to just acknowledge some of the research that, of course, we're drawing on in our conversations. Obviously the work of the Child collection and Francis James Child. It's incredible work, and Bronson, but also the work that's happening currently or has done in the last few decades. Valentina Bould's PhD about James Hogg and her writing on the Hogg family, and Margaret Laidlaw. I did mention Alison McMorland's fieldwork and her text on Willie Scott. And there's also the Walter Scott Project team that included Kath Campbell and Kay McAlpine, and there's some additional work. I think Kath Campbell has a paper about Lucy Broadwood's collecting trips to the south of Scotland, and so there's this amazing network of research that's already available that we're very lucky to have available to us for conversations like this.
That's been really, really brilliant and fascinating, and I was so glad you were able to come and do this. This is marvellous. This is marvellous.
Thank you so much for asking me, Matt. It's a great excuse to sit down and look at the details of one of my favourite songs, and one of our kind of most well sung songs up here. And if nobody's asking me to do it, then it happens less often. So I think in terms of the ripple effect of a project like this, it's really worthwhile in many different ways. So well done, you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm very happy to sit at my desk and facilitate other people's inner nerds. Basically, what we're doing. Giving you an outlet. Another outlet for our inner nerds. Anyway, yeah. I hope you'll come back and do more of this over the course of the podcast lifespan, however long that may be. Yeah. We shall see. But in the meantime, Laurie Watson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
A huge thanks again to Laurie Watson for providing us with the history of the Dowie dens of Yarrow. We're now at the halfway point of the episode, so we'll just take a few minutes and listen to a few different versions of this song sung by traditional singers. So what you're going to hear now are snippets of the Dowie dens of Yarrow sung by Sheila Stewart, Willie Scott, Jimmy McBeath, John MacDonald, Jane Turriff and Stanley Robertson.
There was a lady in the north, you would scarcely find her morrow. She was courted by 7 young lords on the Dowie dens o' Yarrow. Oh, will you take the gun, or will you take the arrow, or will you take the gay broad sword and fight for me in Yarrow?
There lived a lady in the north, you could scarcely find her morrow. She was courted by 9 noblemen and her ploughman boy o' Yarrow. She came o'er yon high hills and down yon paths in Yarrow. There he spied 9 noblemen for to fight with him on Yarrow.
There was a lady of the north, You could scarcely find her marrow. She was courted by 9 noblemen, and the ploughman boy of Yarrow. As I looked o'er yon high hill, in Doon and yonder valley, there did I spy 9 noblemen sat a drinking wine in Yarrow. There was a lady in the north, and there a seen her marrow. She was courted by 9 noblemen, and a ploughman lad from Yarrow. No, the 9 saw drinking o' the wine, saw drinking wine in Yarrow, and they made a vow to fight for her on the dewy dens of Yarrow.
He's gonna take his lady gun as you've gone before. The man of my man keep a trace, and the Dowie dens on Yarrow. Obeyed him, my lord, she said. Obeyed him, my marrow. For my 3 brothers, the wolf led thee, and the Dowie den, oh Yarrow.
There was a lady in the north, you scarce could find her marrow. She was courted by 9 gentlemen, and a ploughboy lad frae Yarrow. These 9 said drinking at the wine, I drank wine in Yarrow, and they a swore they would make a vow to fight for her on Yarrow.
And you can find the links to those tracks and the albums they're from in the show notes. Before we get on to our singer half, I would like to take a moment and officially declare our In the Roud Patreon open. Woo! If you head over to patreon.com/intheroud, you'll be able to join one of 2 different subscription tiers. The Roud Robin tier of £5 or more per month will give you access to a selection of the weekly bonus content, and the Knights of the Roud Table tier of £10 or more per month will give you access to all the weekly bonus content. The higher tier subscription will also give you access to a downloadable folder featuring all of the podcast exclusive unaccompanied performances of the songs from Season 1. Once Season 2 finishes, all of the songs from that season will be available to the higher tier patrons too, and so on, and further. Last week on the main podcast, you heard the first of 3 Patreon episodes featuring Nancy Kerr called Singer's Choice, and that episode was on Roud 3378, The Wee Weaver. Coming up over the next few weeks are Nancy Kerr's second and third choices, which are Roud 3065, Elsie Marley, and Roud 165, Adieu Sweet Lovely Nancy. But coming tomorrow, that's Thursday the 31st of October, on the Patreon is the first in a semi-regular Spotlight strand of episodes. These will be taking a look at other aspects of folk song, from collectors to traditional singers to regions of folk song collecting and more. Tomorrow's episode is our first ever collector spotlight, and I'll be joined by Martin Graeber to discuss the life and folk song collecting of Sabin Baring Gould. So head on over to patreon.com/intheroud, sign up and hear Martin Graeber tomorrow, followed by 2 weeks of Singer's Choice episodes with Nancy Kerr. In the meantime, it's on to the second half of this episode. I sat down with Amanda MacLean and we spoke about her history with folk music and her thoughts on the song The Dowie Dens of Yarrow. Well, hello and welcome to In the Roud, Amanda MacLean. Hello.
Hi there, Matt. Lovely to be here.
Oh, it's lovely to have you here as well. Yeah, this is really nice. I was very glad that you were able to come on earlier than the reason why I got in touch with you, because I was going through some. This is the first time we've met, really, apart from the pre-recording stuff, and I was going through some folk music journals, the EFDSS folk song journals, and found 2 articles written by you on one particular song, the Andrew Lammy, the Mill of Tifty's Annie, and so I got in touch with you to say, I want you for the history side of that song. But then that song is Roud 98. And so if you want to hear Amanda's history of that one, you can join us in the summer of 2027.
Looking forward to that.
But I realized that was a long way off, and so I wanted, I didn't want to just ignore you before then for the next 3 years. So we had a look at the songs coming up over the first handful of seasons, and here we are in season 2, which is great to have you so early on, as well as booking you in for 3 years' time. So tell us about yourself first of all, just an introduction to you and your sort of history with folk music. How did you come to folk music and folk songs? What's the story?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that because I for a while I used to think I only started getting into traditional song or into folk music after I left Scotland and moved to London, which was about 20 years ago. And to an extent that's true because it was about 15 or 16 years ago that I started singing solo in folk clubs. So, that was kind of, before that, I had not done that. And I was terrified of it. And I just eventually, actually, I realized I was kind of creatively blocked. And I started working my way through a book called The Artist's Way. It's a kind of do-it-yourself course that you work through, and it releases creativity. And if anybody listening is feeling like they are creatively blocked, I would absolutely recommend it. I wasn't planning to do an advert, but it is really worth having a look at. And I worked my way through it, and that really kind of opened me up in lots of ways around writing and around music. And so that was when I was like, no, I am going to go out there and I'm going to start singing in folk clubs. And I have been doing that ever since. Went along to like Unity Folk Club and particularly Sharps Folk Club. Sharps was the first time I stood up in front of an audience by myself and sang a song.
Oh, wow.
With my eyes shut. Yeah. Absolutely terrified. Ran out the door, rabbit in the headlights at the end of the evening, but I kept going back, and there was a kind of wee posse of us that arrived approximately at the same time, and so we formed a little bit of a gang and became some of us formed a band. Well, there were 3 of us, formed a trio called Three Drunken Maidens, which is more or less like what it sounds. So we sang together for a while. That was me and Alison Frostick and Claire Rakic. We had a great time, and that came to an end. But I've carried on doing singing in folk clubs, in London, and lots of stuff. But before that, I had a lot of hinterland, shall we say, with folk music. So I used to think I only came to it when I, at that time, 15, 16 years ago. But actually, it was always there. Think about it. I've always had a connection with folk song, and I've got a book here which dates from my childhood. I don't know if you know it, the Fireside Book of Folk Songs.
Oh no, I don't know that one.
Well, we had an old Steinway piano. I used to go through it,
Yeah.
playing the piano with one finger and singing the songs in my head, I think. And it's just full of folk songs, all the standards, international ones as well, like the La Marseillaise and the Peatbog Soldiers
Excellent.
and Annie Laurie, Home Sweet Home. It's got a lot of American songs in it. And they're accompanied with these lovely illustrations, quite simple illustrations, but very lively, of like sailors drinking and falling about for what can you do with the drunken sailor and that kind of thing. So anyway, I used to go through this, picking out the tunes out with one finger. And my parents said, "Do you not want piano lessons?" And I was like, "No, I don't want piano lessons." My brother had piano lessons. My best friend had piano lessons. I refused to have piano lessons. And I'm like, what was I doing? What an idiot. I would love to play the piano. I would love to play all kinds of things, but I don't. But what I do now is sing. And so that was there. And when I came to folk music in a conscious sense, when I started going to folk clubs, I was recognizing these songs, which are quite a few of them will be sung as standards in folk clubs. I also remember various formative moments where I, continued that going towards folk and traditional song long before I started becoming a singer, as it were. Well, there was always singing, but it was singing in the sense of, in a choir or singing along with people, which is a really important part of singing, obviously. But I remember hearing I was doing a volunteering week, a residential volunteering week in Aberdeenshire. And one of the evenings we went out to a pub and there was a pub singer and he was singing all kinds of stuff. And I still remember hearing the Wild Mountain Thyme and the Wild Rover for the first time. They're the songs, he sang all evening and he sang all kinds of songs. But those two songs I just loved, particularly the Wild Mountain Thyme. I was like, I just fell in love with it. And when I was at uni, there was a group of people, I was more acquaintance, they were friends of friends. They weren't really my friends, but they did some trad singing and things, which again, I remember it. I remember it happening. I remember one night after a party, they were this group of people singing all night, and it was fabulous. And then actually my first job, I lived in the West Highlands working for a big fish farming company, and there's a huge traditional culture that belongs there. It's not something artificial or introduced, it just belongs there. And at parties or in the pub, music would just happen. And there were people singing all kinds of songs. So some of them would be your kind of trad songs or ballads,
Yeah.
and others were, basically pop songs. But people were just singing and they were playing instruments. Angus Grant used to turn up in the pub. Angus Grant from Sugar Nifty, and people would go, "Oh, Angus is down the pub," down at
Excellent.
Glenuig, or John McCusker, Ian McFarlane, with their fiddles. So people were very, very into it. And I was like, I love this, but I couldn't really take the step to do it.
Right.
And so so it's all this, I guess it's something very repressed.
And all it took was a visit to Sharp's Folk Club.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
It's a very good club. That's in the the bar downstairs at Cecil Sharp House, isn't it?
That's right. And I still go. I've kind of come and gone, but it's always felt like my home club.
Yeah.
And I actually during lockdown, I ran Sharps and Isolation Zoom sessions every week,
Oh, great.
which became this kind of international phenomenon because we started recruiting people from, well, mostly from the States and Canada and a few others from other places. So that was a lovely thing to do during that period.
That's great. Yeah, we did that with the Musical Traditions Club as well. We ran a Zoom version of it.
I have to say though that I thought that I could cope with running a Zoom session better than being a participant. Like if
Just sitting there, yeah.
yeah, I just yeah, never mind that. But no, there was a lot of that going. Islington Folk Club did one as well. There's another thing I should mention about my kind of musical hinterland. Was when I was in Glasgow lived in Glasgow for 7 years as an adult, and I was a member of Eurydice, which is Glasgow's women's socialist choir. I don't think it's still running, but I that was quite formative in terms of folk singing as well, because the choir was led by Gordina McCulloch,
Oh,
absolutely
yeah.
fabulous, traditional, really gutsy singer.
We featured her briefly in season 1 in the Lord Thomas and Fair Eleanor episodes.
Ah, great.
Because
Yeah.
Debbie Armo was our singing guest, had from Gordina McCulloch. So yeah, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and so I do remember the first time she opened her mouth and sang, to lead the choir, and I was blown away. I just could not believe somebody could produce that sound.
Mm.
So we used to go away for weekends occasionally, like hire a youth hostel, or we would go down to the Raise Your Banners festival, political song in Sheffield, and we'd go, we'd do all those the official things in the festival and do performances, but we also would then go back to the bar in the hotel we were all staying and just sit around, or in the youth hostel we were staying in, sit around at late into the night and sing. And that was when the folk songs, trad songs came out, and I remember sitting and like sweating, terrible anxiety waiting for my turn. It's just like your hands are cold and sweating and you're terrified. So I would do a spot then, but like I say, Sharps was when I stood up in front of an audience and sang. So I've been kind of developing that since then, really. And I should also mention that I now sing with in another trio. I mentioned I was in a trio a few years ago. I now sing in a trio called Rumpled Muslin with
Okay.
Alison Frosdick and Wendy Lanchin, and we've been recording our first EP.
Great.
So it's taken a while to record, painful process, but hopefully that will be coming out sometime in the future.
Oh, we'll look forward to that very much. Um, right. So, yeah, here we are at the Dowie Dens of Yarrow. We heard an excellent history of the song and much more from the fabulous Laurie Watson
Yeah.
earlier. Where does your history with this song start? Do you have an exact memory of the first time you came across this song?
I have two conflicting memories about this. One is Moira Craig, and I think I first heard it from her, either singing at the Cellar Upstairs Folk Club, which is another London club that I go to. I'm actually a resident at now. So I remember hearing her singing it, and so it was either at the Cellar Upstairs or possibly at a ballad day down at Lewis Folk Club in Sussex. But I also have a memory of a friend saying, do you know this song how about singing it? It's such a lovely, sad song. And looking it up. And so I'm really unsure. I'm actually unsure which came first, but definitely the first time I heard it was Moira's singing of it, which is lovely, fantastic.
All right, I mean, Moira is just one of the greatest.
Yeah. And ballads particularly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I associate this song with her very, very closely. So those are two conflicting memories, but anyway, I decided that I would sing it. And then of course it was like, okay, I need to find the words and the tune. I don't remember specifically where I got the tune from. I must have listened to it somewhere. I don't pick tunes up. Well, most tunes I don't pick up absolutely instantly, so it wouldn't just have been from hearing it sung by Moira once.
Right.
But what I do remember is the words and how I came by the words that I sing. And that was, I went with the three drunken maidens. We had a weekend in Dublin. We went to the Goleen Folk Club.
Oh yeah, lovely, lovely club, that one.
Yeah, it's great. I've only been the once. I'd love to go back. So good. But I went, yeah, we went with three drunken maidens to Dublin, and the first thing we did was go to there's a folk library in Dublin, which obviously is not, the biggest draw for most tourists, but we went there. And I looked through, I was like, okay. I wasn't the driving force behind going to the library, I have to say. And I was like, okay, here we are in a library. And then I was like, okay, fine, I will use this time. I will look up versions of Dowie Dens and find words that I want to sing, which I did. And I've actually got the notes here
Ah, very good.
of this is me copying down a version. I'm surprised I've still got this. I don't know which book they came from because I haven't written that down. I've got version B, which but whose version B it is, I'm not sure, but I think it's probably from the Greg Duncan collection because I've written Mrs. Margaret Gillespie at the
Okay.
end. And she was one of the biggest contributors to the Greg Duncan collection. So I'm guessing I'll have to look it up and find if that's correct. So I sing more or less her version, but with some quite a few variations.
And there it is in I had a quick look on Bronson, the tunes of the child ballads, and Group A, Tune 1, sung by Mrs. Gillespie of Glasgow.
Ah,
Learnt in Aberdeenshire in the 1850s from Alexander Cruikshank, Redburn Blythe, communicated by James B. Duncan. There you go.
okay. I'm probably right.
So there we go. That's confirmed. That's confirmed that for you.
Thanks for that. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so I'm delighted that I've written that because I was wondering, like where when I was, when I was thinking about recording this episode, I was like, where did I get it? Or I remember obviously going to the library, but not whose it was. So now I know, which is great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I realized looking through the verses that I wrote down, I sing all of her verses with just a few variations, but there's a couple of verses that I've added to it. So there's a verse late on. So when the heroine arrives in Yarrow and she finds her true love, and it's a verse that she washed his face, she combed his hair as she had done before, oh, and she kissed the blood frae off his wounds in the Dowie dens of Yarrow. That's how I sing it, and I've made some slight variations. And I have to say, you have ruined that verse for me with the vampire thing.
Oh, I see the vampires.
I,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know if I'll ever be able to sing it the same again.
Sorry, that was an off the cuff comment. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but that verse, she washed his face, she combed his hair as she had done before. Oh, and I was like, that's like a closing bracket. As she has done before. Oh, it's like closing a bracket.
Yeah.
And I was like, that must mean there's an opening bracket where she washes his face and she combs his hair, because that this verse is referring to it. But the version that I had from Margaret Gillespie doesn't have that verse.
Right.
And so I was like, but there must be, that verse must exist. So then I did a bit more research and I was really delighted to find that I was right, because there are lots of versions that have, near the start when she's dressing him to go off to fight for her, they have a verse where she washes his face, she combs his hair. And I sing, she washed his face, she combed his hair, she girded his hips sae narrow. And she made of him a knight sae bold to fight for her in Yarrow. So it was that there's this kind of structure that oral singing has. There's kind of, I don't know if you've come across it, you will have come across this, but the structure that ballads have of that kind of bracketing, and also the repeating and stock phrases
Oh,
and
yeah,
stock
yeah.
verses that you recognize. So that bracketing worked for me, and it was really nice to find that, oh yeah, that's the structure is there. Just something that I thought I'd mention actually in connection with that verse of the getting him ready for to go and fight for her, because that's often sung. But if you listen to the traveller versions on Tobar and Dolchus, the Kista Riches that Laurie mentioned, a fantastic resource. The traveller versions, mostly they have the getting him ready to go and fight, but they're very, very different from what is generally sung. So Belle Stewart, and that is an amazing version by Belle Stewart, she has, so I sing, and most people sing kind of that I've heard some kind of variant of she washed his face, she combed his hair, she girded his hips so narrow, or she, put a sword round his waist or whatever. But the Belle Stewart and Sheila Stewart and other travellers, they sing, "Oh, will you tack a gun, or will you tack an arrow, or will you tack a big broadsword to fight for me in Yarrow?"
Right.
And you know now what the next verse is, because you understand how ballads work, and you understand how,
I will not take something. I will not take the thing. I will take the broadsword. Is
yes,
that it? It was an educated guess.
it's not a guess, because you know how ballads work,
Yeah,
and
of course.
that
It,
part
it
of,
that took me a couple of seconds, but yes,
yeah,
I
yeah,
get that straight away. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and that is part of uh the oral tradition. And it's interesting that, it's the travelers who have really got that strong oral type of
Yeah.
structure within the ballad.
Well,
And that,
we actually talk
yeah.
about that a bit in next week's episode,
Ah,
because Brian Peters is doing the history for that one, and we did talk a bit about the use of repetition in songs,
yeah,
about things in particular with that one, with the demon lover as it comes up, it will be the what hills, but you get that kind of thing, and yeah, all sorts of repetition, and the way some verses are the same as the previous verse with
yeah,
with a different point of view, but the response from some questions, but it's
yes,
mostly the same words. It's all that sort of thing. So that verse is, I will not take the whatever it was, the gun. I will not take an arrow. But I will take the broadsword
yeah,
to fight for
exactly.
you in Yarrow. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's these features, these features of it, and it's, yeah, well, Brian's probably going to say this as well, but it's that it's a way for the oral singer to actually remember the song easily.
Yeah.
And it dates back to the Odyssey and the Iliad because the same techniques are used in them.
Oh.
And this is a theory. I don't know if you know the Albert J. Lord. He did research, and I think it was the 1920s and 30s in Yugoslavia, where there were Yugoslav singers who they'll sing for 2 or 3 days, and they'll tell a story, and there's no possibility that you can just remember word for word.
Right.
And they remember the structure of the song, and then they're almost composing it as they go from a lot of stock phrases that they're picking out of their repertoire.
Well, it's certainly a
Yeah,
case of, yeah, it makes it easier to learn. It's like some of what I found with songs I've learned that I get to a verse like the first of those two verses, and then I think, well, I've kind of learnt the next verse as well because it's the same thing. So
yeah,
it's an easy way to learn, but then also from an audience, a listener's point of view, it just helps a song to stick in the memory a bit longer
yeah.
from an audience perspective.
Yes, yeah. There's something about it makes you feel kind of comfortable with it. But anyway,
Yeah.
I don't sing those verses.
Oh,
But
okay.
now I'm like, maybe I need to learn Belle Stewart's version because that would be a different thing. Um,
Yeah.
there were a couple of other there's one other verse. Yeah. There's one other verse that Margaret Gillespie didn't sing that I sing, and I found it in on my notes. I've got version double D, which sounds like a brass eyes, but is in fact somebody else's version. And I think there's actually two verses that I sing that I don't in the other versions I've been listening to and to prepare for this episode. I've not heard them sung.
Okay.
So there's one is it's when she gets the news, she hears the news from her father that her true love is dead. And she wrung her hands, she tore her hair. Oh, that's interesting. Because I'm reading it off the notes, but I have changed it. So what do I sing? Um, she wrung her hands, she tore her hair, her heart's near burst with sorrow. For well she loved her Cluman lad, the fairest flower in Yarrow.
Right.
And then she put her hand up to her head. She put her hand up to her hair where the ribbons hung down bonny o, and she pulled them down and let them fall, and sae fast she's ran to Yarrow. And it's just that very, it's almost hackneyed, she wrung her hands, she tore her hair, but then her heart near burst with sorrow. And you can really, the bursting, you can hear it in that word. And it's such a depiction of deep and sudden grief hitting her. And then I'm imagining she put her hand up to her hair where the ribbons hung down bonny, just that she's done herself up waiting for her true love to come back in victory.
Yeah.
And she's like made herself look really lovely and special for him. And then she gets this news and she's just ripped it away and throwing the ribbons aside. It's nothing now. And then just the racing off to find him. And it's that kind of depth of emotion that it conveys that I just love. There's a lot about hair in this song. And again, with I think that despite the vampire reference that you introduced unhelpfully to my mind, but the tenderness of the kissing the blood from off his wounds, just this very close connection between them, it really moves me. And the other thing about hair is this, she's got this very, very long hair. So it's down to like the back of her knees, 3/4 long, down to the back of her knees. And I was thinking, oh, well, she tied it round his middle so small. That can't be right. Why would she do that? Surely she ties it round her middle so small as a practical uh, thing to get it out of her way. And
Yeah.
I was thinking of changing it to that, but I'm really glad I didn't. Not only because nobody else, as far as I can tell, has ever sung that, so it'd be quite a cheek. But thinking about it, there's this. She ties it round his middle so small. It's like a binding of himself to her. Just
Sure,
that
yeah.
she can't bear to let him go, and she wraps it round. It's like wrapping herself around and her love around him.
She sort of what's the word? Tethered him to her, I suppose, in a way.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And then she bore him from Yarrow, and I think some versions that she carried him home.
Right.
She carried him home, but to bear him, it's like carrying with weight, that a burden, and
Mm.
the weight of grief that she is taking with her as well. So I think there's these small words that convey a great deal in a song. You've got very few words to get it, the full meaning of the story and the emotion. And so the use of those, particular words can really tell you a lot about what's going on.
Yes, that's very good use of particular words, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
very
yeah,
impressive.
yeah,
Sometimes you have to have like a whole verse explaining how she's feeling, but in this one, you just get the
yeah.
word burst kind of it gives so much, as you
Yes,
said. It's,
yeah,
it implies
yeah,
so much more than just the word burst. It's, yeah,
yeah.
very good.
There's one other thing I thought I'd mention, because it's this relationship with her father, who is a very callous man.
Right.
And at the end, the last two verses are conversation between her and her father.
Yeah.
And you discuss this with Laurie a bit as well. But he says, what's your problem? I'll wed you to a better man than the one you lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, than the one you lost in Yarrow. And she uses the expression "the one I lost in Yarrow" at the end as well. But it's it's a very different meaning to the same phrase. So to him, it's like the one you lost, as if she'd like dropped a couple of coins out her pocket by mistake or something, or lost a glove or something. I can get you another, get you another, don't worry. So it's
Yeah.
just, you lost it. But for her, it's the one I lost, just that, um, the one, and the loss and the strength of that. So I try to get that into the delivery, um,
Yeah.
when I sing it. And I also, I this is
But
a violation of ballad structure. So, which I think I introduced. I don't know if somebody else did it and I picked it up, or if I just decided to do it. But um, parents and children always call each other dear, don't they? It's like, oh, father dear, oh, mother dear.
yeah.
And so that last two, the pair of verses at the end, he says, oh, daughter dear. And
Yeah.
when she replies, I have her saying, oh, father. He's not dear to her anymore. And so I do that. Maybe it's an affectation, but
No,
I
no,
introduce that
I
thing.
think that's good. Rules are there to be broken. Not that it's a rule really, but if we want to call it a rule, it's there to be broken. And
Yeah,
I think it works.
yeah, yeah. So I guess that's the kind of the story of how I've come to the version that I sing as I sing it.
Sure, yeah.
But I'm really pleased to now know that it was Mrs. Margaret Gillespie's version, because she was a big deal as far as
Yeah,
our songs go in Scotland. So that's great to know.
that's right. And I was just looking at that. I've become quite obsessed with this American version that I found in Bronson when I was prepping for Laurie's half, the Derry Downs of Arrow. I was looking at the last two verses because we were talking about that just now. Although they seem to be the wrong order. It seems to be second to last verse is "Oh Father dear," etc., and the last verse is "Oh daughter dear, I'll lead you to a better lad." So, but I might, if I learn this, I might swap them around back to the way they should be because it doesn't quite make sense in that order.
It's no, in that order, it's more like he's trying to comfort her.
Yeah. Oh, daughter dear, dry up your tears and weep no more for sorrow. I'll lead you to a better lad than the one you lost on Arrow.
Yeah.
But that comes after the one about he's the one I lost in.
Yes.
Which I don't quite like the way that I don't like that order particularly.
No, exactly, because that there it seems like in the order in the Arrow one you're quoting, it sounds like he's responding to her grief by trying to comfort her with
cheer up, I'll find you another husband,
whereas the way round it's usually done.
And also if you swap them around to the way it should be, you then get a brilliant last line. Well, it's the last line is the one I lost on Arrow, but the third line, the one that leads into that whole verse is, "Oh father dear, 7 sons have you, you can wed them all tomorrow, but the very old bloom that sprung in June is the one I lost on Arrow." I don't know what that means, but I love it.
It's great. It doesn't make sense.
I'm gonna do a bit of digging and see what I can see if it's anything other than a Bloom and June reference, rhyme, or whether it actually means something. The very old bloom that sprung in June is the one I lost on Arrow.
I love it the way it's probably I'm very much into mondegreens. I quite often when you get things like that, it's a mishearing that's become its own thing, and so it has this kind of strange mystery.
Yeah, mondegreens are brilliant. We haven't actually mentioned mondegreens on the podcast before, so I'm just gonna briefly, a mondegreen, anyone doesn't know, it's just a mishearing, but it's a particular reference to a particular ballad, isn't it?
Yes.
Mondegreens. It's from the Bonnie Earl of Moray ballad, and because you get the line, what people misheard as "they have slain the Earl of Moray and Lady Mondegreen," when it actually was "they have slain the Earl of Moray and laid him on the green."
Yes,
which is a magnificent mishearing. But that's why we now call, in folk music terms, when you come across something that's been misheard but then makes sense as well.
Yeah,
we call it a mondegreen.
Yeah, I love that because it's like, who was Lady Mondegreen?
Yeah, everyone went, "Who's this Lady Mondegreen? She's not mentioned in the song anywhere." But yeah, you get all sorts of things, and I guess that stems. It's kind of a distant cousin of the game of Chinese whispers, which originated in, I think it was World War One, with the mishearing of "send reinforcements, we're going to advance." By the time it got to the end of the line, it became "send 3 and 4pence, we're going to a dance."
Great.
And so I guess that kind of mishearing of things. And there's a long list somewhere on online somewhere of mondegreens. There's quite a lot of them, and I can never bring that many to mind. But whether the very old bloom that rose in June, old bloom, I don't know. I have to ponder that one for a while.
Yeah, maybe it's not mondegreen actually. It's maybe just trying to make sense, put in something that makes sense. Don't know. But actually, Arrow, that must be a mondegreen, is it?
Well, that's probably just taking it away from Scotland, but at the same time not changing the word. Just getting rid of the first letter.
Yeah. Or probably, actually, Yarrow doesn't mean anything. Maybe to as much.
That's right. In fact, last week on the podcast, I played the Patreon episode of The Wee Weaver with John Malden and Antika, and John Malden talked about quite extensively about the change of locales in songs depending on where they're being sung, and because there's no point singing. I guess for some people, there's no point singing Yarrow if you're either not Scottish or you don't know where Yarrow is.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean anything to you, and so you get a lot of that changing. So Arrow, I don't know. Maybe there was a town called Arrow.
Possibly, yeah. But also, I was interested in your conversation with Laurie that Yarrow has mostly not been turned into other words, or
Yeah, that's right.
um,
Aside, because I think it is predominantly found in Scotland, so it's never changed.
yeah.
Because
Although what you would change it to is a because it's so prominent in as you were saying, it's so prominent in the
yes,
song.
the Dowie dens of Lawrence Kirk or something doesn't quite have the same ring, does it?
Exactly.
You know, so
The
or
Dowie Dens of Peterhead.
Dowie dens of Steenhive or something. But yeah, it
No.
doesn't
Dowie
quite.
Dens of Stenhouse Muir.
Yeah, so but yeah, I guess Yarrow. It's just obviously it's the name of a place and it's all sort of set there. But yeah, it does. It's quite a sort of romantic sounding word, I suppose, in context of
Mm,
the song as well. Not romantic, but it's very singable and it fits so well,
yeah.
and it's used. It's I guess it comes at the end of every verse, don't it? Doesn't it? Because that's the point of the thing. So I guess it's too regular
Mm,
to be. If you change it, it's got to be changed every time, and therefore you've got to find rhymes for it.
yes.
You've got to find 13 rhymes for it.
Yeah.
Whereas other songs, it might only turn up once, the mention of the location, and so you don't have to change quite as much to make it fit. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably something like that. But yeah.
Yeah, and all those rhymes for Yarrow can be quite funny.
Yeah. Well, one of the modern versions that I was going to mention is Peggy Seeger. She does a
Right,
version called what is it? The Dewy Dens of Yarrow.
right.
And she's got a rhyme. She washed his face, she combed his hair, she combed it long and narrow.
Ah,
And it's that's
I mean, it rhymes with Yarrow, but
but that's all.
you don't. It's not really a description of someone combing hair. Narrow.
No, no, exactly. So it's like, yes, it rhymes with Yarrow, but it's like somewhat forced.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and again, the words of this Arrow version, it's quite a lot of verses seem to have taken a leaf out of Ewan McCall's book and don't rhyme at all. She, arrow, dearly, arrow, valleys, arrow,
Mm.
bravery, arrow, wounded, arrow, sorrow, arrow. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Morrow, sorrow, sorrow, arrow. There's a few, but then many to rhyme with arrow, valleys, arrow, tears, arrow, tomorrow, arrow, and sorrow, arrow. Get it in.
Mm,
So yeah,
okay.
it's
Tomorrow and sorrow and yeah,
yeah,
but
so a half of it rhymes and half just doesn't at all. Not even
yeah,
with a different pronunciation. You know,
they gave up.
sometimes you get rhymes in songs that only work if you're singing it in that accent.
Yes.
And why would I
Yeah,
sing it in a Scots accent? I'm not Scottish, so it's you have to make of it what you will sometimes when learning
that's true.
a song that has come from a different kind of nationality or a different accent. Because whenever I learn Scots songs, it does happen occasionally. I very much I sing it in my own accent, obviously, but I very much anglicize it as much as
Mm.
possible in terms of it just sounds silly if I sing some Scots words. I just can't. It sounds so silly. So I'll change a wah back to away because it sounds natural for me to sing it.
Yeah.
I always get confused when people sing "I'll gang a wah" and I think, well, no, you don't, because you don't sound like someone from Scotland. Anyway, that's a pet peeve of mine.
I love the fact that people want to sing Scots songs, but I think you do have to. Some people can do it, and some don't. And I think it's more a matter of finding what your limits are and knowing what they are and kind of respecting that. It
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, I actually there's some words I'll anglicize because I'm not. I feel awkward singing. I can't. I'm trying to think which words I tend not to do a Scots word, but there's some like I'm no actually I'm more comfortable singing that in English rather than the Scots word. So
Right,
I even do it myself. I'm trying to think of an example and I can't off the top of my head, but I do a bit.
yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also a thing about the sometimes words won't fit a tune unless you move your vowels at least in the direction of the original accent or dialect they were sung in. So I learned this when I was doing I just went to a gospel singing workshop, and the leader was saying, yeah, you don't impersonate an American accent, but move your vowels in that direction because they have to fit.
Sure, yeah.
So I think that goes for, whatever language or accent you're hopefully not mimicking, but
That's right.
yeah, you need to respect it to an extent.
There's one I sing that's I've anglicized it completely, apart from one word, because it won't work
Yeah.
unless that word is there. It's version of Bonnywood Hall that Pete Shepherd told me to learn, and it mentions the flower at the end, gowans,
Mm,
and if it would sound silly if I changed that to daisies.
yeah.
Gowans are essentially daisies, but
Yeah.
more often than not. So I thought if I sang "When I Think on the Daisies" at Bonnywood Hall, it just doesn't work. So
No.
I allowed myself to sing gowans just because it.
But also you can say gowns. It sounds fine when you say it.
Yeah, it's not I'll gang a wah and that sort of stuff, which just
Yeah.
sounds stupid when I say it. So yeah, there's a balance, but
Yeah,
more often than not,
exactly.
I will just try and anglicize something as much as possible if I was to sing it, just because
Yeah. Yeah.
it just sounds silly.
But also you need to feel comfortable yourself singing it.
Yeah,
And it is you singing it and not somebody else.
totes. Right, let's go on to our recommendations section.
Recommendations.
So yeah, let's have some recommendations from you in terms of some more, I say, modern versions, but versions that aren't classified as archival or source recordings and that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Well, actually, that Peggy Seeger version that I mentioned, the Dewey Dens of Yarrow, she does a lovely version. It's quite a truncated one, so a lot of I don't think the actual battle is in it at all. But it just almost cuts immediately to the getting the news and going to find the body. But she does it really beautifully. That's on A Song for You and Me, her album.
Right, great.
And it's got some of these things that are, it's got these changes that you tend to get in American sort of versions of British songs. So she dreams she was pulling the heather bells. That in my version, I dreamed I was pulling the heather bells.
Yep.
Whereas in Peggy's, she's pulling or picking the hazel bloom.
Ah,
So, just a change there.
maybe that's something to do with this American version and the very old bloom that sprung
Ah,
in June.
yes.
The hazel bloom, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a
Yeah.
link there.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. So, but that's a good one.
nice.
I have to recommend Moira Craig because she's so identified with this ballad to me,
Sure.
and she does an absolutely lovely version. She's
I would definitely want Moira on the podcast at some point. I'm gonna corner her and
definitely.
strap her
So
to a Zoom meeting and get her on this. Yeah. Absolutely.
yeah, it's on Moira Craig and Carolyn Robson's album On Both Sides the Tweed.
Oh yes, that's right.
Yeah. And then another singer who I really rate is Jean Redpath. And she's got a version on Song of the Seals. And that's another just like really solid, proper trad style rendition of it. Then there's actually a couple of versions which I found on YouTube. I have to say, I had to just go Googling and YouTubing to find, okay, who has done this. But yeah, I won't say I'm not a fan of the Corries I don't like the Corries, but actually, although the Corries have like always been around, I know very little of their repertoire, really. But on YouTube, they've got this song with a sitar accompaniment, you know, the Indian sitar, gorgeous instrument. And it's so atmospheric, especially the kind of the first few verses. They've got this thing bring away in the background. And it's really, it's lovely, lovely stuff.
Great.
And my last recommendation is Dick Gaughan. And
Of course, Dick
he
Gaughan.
put that on, he did it on An Outlaw and Dreamer. And it's just this really slow, considered, beautiful singing with a drone all the way through, just a steady drone. And that, like the sitar and the choris, it creates a real kind of eerie, mournful effect that suits the song really well. So definitely worth having a listen to. Definitely worth having a listen to all of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great. I think Dick Gaughan said that was one of the first big Scots ballads he ever learnt, I think. So
Mm,
it's
mm.
obviously a big one for him as well. Great stuff. I will throw out there into the mix someone I did actually get in contact with about being in this episode, but she was too busy, and then sent me in the direction of Laurie Watson.
Mm.
Alison McMorland
Oh yeah.
is wonderful
Mm.
person. I a very formative person in my childhood because she recorded the album The Funny Family of all these kids songs,
Oh, great.
and so she's firmly in my mind as like this childhood person for me. But she had a duo a long time ago with Peter Webb, who was
Mm.
one of the people that ran the Musical Traditions Club in London, and they did an album on Topic Records in 1980 called Alison McMorland and Peter Webb, and they sang it there. And I'm pretty sure, I haven't heard it in a long time, I'm pretty sure that's the Maggie Stewart version that Laurie and I mentioned earlier,
Okay, yeah, yeah,
which is great. And Peter Webb singing is great, but Alison singing is absolutely
yeah,
sensational.
yeah.
She's a big authority on Willie Scott as
Of
well,
course, yeah,
who we mentioned earlier as well because
yeah.
of this song. In fact, she even did a lecture on Willie Scott when I was when I was at university
Hmm.
on the folk music degree. So she's a big important figure in my life, Alison McMorland. Dougie Mackenzie is someone I've only really met earlier this year at Whitby Folk Week, and him and Brian Miller as a duo were performing, and I emceed them once. And I absolutely loved their stuff. It was wonderful. And they spent the week telling everyone that I was the best MC they'd had a week, which was very nice of them. I was very chuffed with that. But yeah, Dougie sang it on an album. I had the list somewhere. An album called Along the Way that he did in 2019. She said, "This border ballad has the lot: love, class discrimination, family dispute, and murder."
What more could you want? What more could you want?
Absolutely. Another shout out to Andy Turner. Andy has a fantastic resource of songs that he knows called A Folk Song a Week, which was, I guess, inspired by John Bowden's A Folk Song a Day project. Andy decided to do a folk song a week, and he got to well over 300, I think, in the end.
That's commitment.
But he did do the Dowie Yarrow on that. And so I always shout out to Andy because I think he's an absolutely terrific singer, as we will prove evidence of in a couple of weeks, because he is the singer guest in 2 weeks' time on Roud 15. So we'll hear Andy then as well with a different song. Keeping it in-house with this episode, Laurie Watson did record it and sing it, as she said, and she learned it from Willie Scott. I think she just sings the Willie Scott version. And that's on her. She did a series of monthly digital singles in 2019. So I assume there's a Bandcamp page for that somewhere. And then there was a CD, selections of that, and it's on there, the Yarrow Acoustic Sessions. And so, yeah, Laurie Watson is as you heard, excellent person on the history side, but is also a brilliant singer. And I love hearing her sing. And I'll just finish off with people I always come back to when I talk about folk songs and my history of folk music is the trio Shepherd, Spears and Watson. Pete Shepherd, Tom Spears and Arthur Watson. They made 2 albums together, which are 2 of my favourite albums of folk songs, let alone Scots songs. And on their first album, first of two, called "They Smiled as We Came In," which they made in 2005, Tom Spears sang the Dowie Dens of Yarrow, and that's so wonderful to hear that. I think Tom's one of the best singers, and he learnt that in the 1960s, and he said the text is pretty close to Norman Buchan's 101 Scottish Songs book. It's in there, and the tune is from the singing of Jessie MacDonald, which was collected by Peter Hall. It was a collector, and so yeah, that version's brilliant. We've got quite a lot of recommendations there. That's 5 each. That's 10. That's a full house. I try and get up to 5 each from both of us on these episodes, and sometimes we can't manage it, and sometimes we manage it and then some.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go and look them all up, because I'm pretty sure I've got that CD. I've not listened to it for a while, but they smiled as we come in.
Oh yeah.
Pretty sure I've got that.
Yeah, well, that and their second album, "O'er the High Hills," are just they're never far from my speakers, my car speakers, or my phone.
Yeah,
highly recommend.
Yeah,
and Pete Shepard and Arthur Watson still perform as a duo, and do the occasional 3-gig tour of England, which they did about a month ago. So, and I couldn't go. Anyway, before I ramble on about how much I love them too much, that brings us to a close. I will put the links to YouTube, links to all those in the episode notes. But I think we'd better stop there. Yeah, well, thanks for coming on and doing this. This has been brilliant.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and I guess I'll see you in 2027.
Yes, that's right. I'm sure we can have you on before then for another, in the singer half of another episode. I think we did look at the list, and there might be 1 or 2 opportunities for that before we get your big drum roll led appearance in the summer of 2027, when we get to Andrew Lammy, the Miller Tifty's Annie, which is a phenomenal song, and can't wait to hear all of that stuff. But let's finish. So thank you very much for doing this, and we'll see you again sometime.
Thank you.
There came a lady frae the north, you scarce could find her marrow. She was courted by 9 gentlemen, and a bloomin' laddie frae Yarrow. The 9 of them sat drinking wine in her father's hall in Yarrow, and they've made a plan among them all to fight wi' him in Yarrow. She's washed his face, she's combed his hair, she's girded his hips in arrow, and she's made of him a knight sae bold to fight for her in Yarrow. As he's gone up yon high, high hill, and down yon dens in Yarrow, it was there he's met with 9 armed men, come to fight with him in Yarrow. There's 9 of you and 1 of me, that marks an equal marrow, but I will fight you 1 by 1 in the Dowie dens of Yarrow. Well, 3 he slew, and 3 he withdrew, and 3 he's wounded sorrow, but our brother John slipped in behind, and he's pierced his body through. Oh, gae hame, ye false young man, and tell your sister sorrow, for her true love John lies pale and wan in the Dowie dens of Yarrow. Oh, father dear, I dreamed a dream, and I fear that it means sorrow, for I dreamed I was pulling the heather bells in the Dowie dens of Yarrow. Oh, daughter dear, I'll read your dream, and to you it does mean sorrow, for your lover John lies dead and gone in the Dowie dens of Yarrow. She's wrung her hands, she's tore her hair, her heart's near burst wi' sorrow, for well she loved her bloomin' lad, the fairest flower in Yarrow. She's put her hand up to her hair, where the ribbons hung down bonny o, and she's pulled them down and she's let them fall, and sae fast she's ran to Yarrow. As she's gone up yon high, high hill, and down yon den sae narrow, it was there she spied her true love John, lying pale and wan in Yarrow. She's washed his face, she's combed his hair, as she has done before, oh, and she's kissed the blood frae off his wounds in the Dowie dens of Yarrow. Her hair it was 3/4 long, and the colour o' it was yellow. She's tied it round his middle sae small, and she's bore him hame frae Yarrow. O daughter dear, dry up your tears, what need for all this sorrow? For I'll wed you to a better man than the one you lost in Yarrow. O father, ye hae 7 sons, ye may wed them all tomorrow, but a fairer flower never bloomed in June than the one I lost in Yarrow.
That was Amanda MacLean singing The Dowie Dens of Yarrow. And that brings us to the end of this episode. What did you think? What are your thoughts on the song? I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to drop me an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk or visit the podcast on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Just search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on Apple Podcasts, if that's where you're getting your podcasts from. That sort of thing really helps the podcast to reach a wider audience. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, Laurie Watson and Amanda MacLean. Don't forget to sign up to patreon.com/intheroud to get weekly bonus content and to hear this week's spotlight episode on the folk song collector Sabin Baring Gould with my guest Martin Graeber. Otherwise, join me next week on the main podcast for episode 4. We will be looking at Roud 14, which is the child ballad The Demon Lover. My historical guest will be Brian Peters, and my singer guest will be Emily Portman. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.